Welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership. And this is where we have the podcast partners, Graham and Jonathan, where we talk about different topics around the Inspiring Leadership Compass. And we're on to the third episode, which is on PQ, meaning and purpose. Your dharma, your calling, your vocation, why you do what you do. So let me introduce my partner, Graham. So Graham's just come back from climbing 12,000 feet up Mount Fuji. He's also, I think, one of the top podcasters in the world, and certainly running his own podcast agency. And people who want to find someone to run their podcast for them, get in touch with Graham, because he certainly does superb ones. I've just introduced someone, and I think he'll be a great partner for them. So that's Graham. Graham, over to you.
Jonathan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Warm welcome. Looking forward to round 3 and all the feedback from the listeners as well. Keep it coming. Jonathan really is the star of this show. He's made it happen. I'm really just here to kind of make up the numbers, I feel, sometimes in terms of our experience. But there's a lot of conversations that Jonathan and I have had generally around what we're going to talk about tonight. So tonight is, and there's a lot of stuff we'll talk about for the first time, but we are very passionate about understanding purpose, working with people on purpose. And I think Jonathan has helped me think about these questions, the bigger questions, and definitely challenges, hopefully for the listeners as well, challenges you to think about the bigger questions. That's why I like these conversations. I feel challenged. I feel like I might, if I don't answer them properly, he's going to make me do 20 press-ups.
Well, you're the one who the extreme distance running and training. I have deep respect for you. Let's have a look at those questions from last week. A couple of questions from the audience. So a CEO from London asked, how do you lead new entrants to the workplace who have a very different sense of meaning and purpose from my own generation? That's a good question, isn't it, Graham? What's your first thoughts about that? That generation coming in, the 20-year-olds and maybe some of the early 30s, but those in the 20s, what gives them meaning and purpose, and the expectations they have compared to the generation who are now leading them and trying to get the organization staffed with these people?
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of talk, doesn't there, in business circles about generational hiring. That there seems to be this issue, isn't there, with young people and their attitude towards work. Often at the worst, it's talk about, let's talk about millennials and how they're lazy, et cetera, all that, the trophy kids. We've heard all that. And then at the best, it's, there's a problem with corporates that they don't offer what this generation wants. I think, it's, the truth is somewhere in the middle. I feel that there's a lot of companies who try and gamify, almost like turn it into a gimmick. They try and give these young people ball pits in the office or free beer or, cool things like the football tables and all that to kind of motivate their people. But ultimately, I think deep down, Jonathan, wonder what you think about this, but deep down, what motivates that generation and our generation is not that different. I think they probably express it in different ways, but the underlying motivations to do meaningful work, I think, are there. Then it's just a case of finding what that is. I don't feel that they're somehow a different species. So I guess there's a lot of internal work, isn't there, for the leader to do there?
No, I think it's a really interesting one. And I was going back and revisiting, I think I was mentioning to you earlier, just been reading the book, The Habit of Excellence. Give a shout out for Colonel Langley Sharp, who was at the Army Centre of Excellence, and they have their own good podcast as well. But he was looking at the younger generation they're recruiting to the military now, and was saying that, for some people, they're expecting to be promoted every year. They don't want to do some unpleasant things that the organization wants them to do. They want to have control over their own life. Now, these are massive generalizations. He knew that, and we know that. Everybody's different, but in it, we went back to John Adair's, as they call it, the 3 balls, the spheres that overlap: task, team, and individual when you're leading. And that there's much more emphasis now on the individual, that just do the task in the old days, make sure the team's looked after and the good of the organization comes first, and service to your organization is the paramount thing. Now people are going, no, what's in it for me? Do you understand what gives me meaning and purpose? Do you understand what makes me tick, what my life story is, what's happened to me? Now, it's a fine balance before you start getting sort of the entitlement culture. Well, I'm entitled to this, and I need this, and what about me? Yeah, but there's also responsibility as well. It's a two-way process. It's a deal. So I think that's I mean, there's much we can talk about that, isn't there? Should we go back to the next one, which was...
It's a great question, by the way.
Yeah.
It certainly challenges us.
It's one that people have got to work on very, very hard. Otherwise, their organizations will be devoid. In fact, you just reminded me, I think it's best I don't say which of the big four professional services firms, but one of the partners was saying to me, we have a real problem because we're going, come and be a partner in our organization after 20 years, and you'll be on £1 million a year.
Yeah.
But you have to stay with us and serve all the ranks all the way up till you get there. And they go, I want it now. No, but you have to wait. You have to do service, get experience, grow. I don't think I'm going to stay around for that long. I'm not going to put up with it. So it's a problem they've got. They've generally got a problem. So New York, COO there asked me, what are the problems of goal obsession? Purpose and meaning and goal obsession. And you've just been goal obsessed, taking your son up Mount Fuji.
Yeah.
In the freezing weather, that picture of you huddled up there, and you got your son up and down. How old is he?
16.
16. Well done him. But what do you think are the problems of goal obsession, Graham?
This is such a good question. I feel that we don't really, we find the answers ourselves. Jonathan and we've had conversations, haven't we, off record about this, that we are goal obsessed, and we know the positives of it. It can be a really powerful driver in our lives, especially when we're younger. As we sort of mature, we get a bit more perspective. We can realize it can be damaging as well. There's finding a balance there. I mean, you talk about the Mount Fuji example, being goal obsessed. Everybody talks about climbing a mountain with the aim of having that sunrise, that picture perfect sunrise in their mind, right? And that's why you do it. That seems to be the goal. And yet there's a lot that happens around that. I think about the climbing, the overnighting in the lodges. You've got to stay overnight on the mountain, the conversations with my son, 14 hours of walking, seeing shooting stars, and saw the Milky Way, Jonathan, for the first time in years. I hadn't seen the Milky Way because, we live in a world where you don't see that anymore. Like I remember in my parents' back garden when I was a kid, I see it really, really clearly, and saw it for the first time. And all those, even meeting people, those kind of unexpected vignettes of their life that you see somebody chat with them, this 80-year-old woman that just climbed up to the top and was coming down, all those kind of things. To me, the problem with goal obsession is you hold all of that hostage to one potential outcome, which is like, oh, this is great sunrise. Actually, for me, sunrise was not that interesting. It was interesting for that moment, but it was everything around that made it such a memorable journey for me. And that, in a way, is a microcosm of many ways of how I'm trying to live my life. Not doing it all for that sunrise, that one moment. And that's the dangerous goal obsessions, because, one day that sunrise becomes a sunset, right? You say, oh, I don't have a lot left. What have I done? Oh, you've done all these things, but what actually did you do? That's the kind of unraveling and almost kind of self-talk that I have to go through. And I think we as goal-obsessed people find that very difficult. And it's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, how have you dealt with it?
Yeah. Well, it's just remind me of there's a very slightly cheesy but quite profound video clip called The Dash. And it goes, Jonathan Bowman-Perks, 1962-2022. Let's say if I died this year, as David died last year. Who knows? It might be. What's in the dash? That little dash between 1962 and 2022. What have you done in that dash? And it literally is the dash. You're rushing from 1962.
That's horrible.
All the way to 2022. And have you made the most of it? And I think time and again, I've been very focused on achieving things, whether mountain marathon world record and other things that I've gone for, doing airborne training with the paras and, getting that parachute wings and putting the maroon beret on, all the kind of thing that you've strived for. and then what? And it's only now, like you, I'm starting to look back and go, did I enjoy the journey? Did I actually remember the journey? It's a bit like having food and I'm still in my military thing. Right, you've got 5 minutes. Go and have lunch. Come back on parade in a new uniform. And I'm just trying to eat food as quickly as I can. And I go, did I inhale that, or do I actually remember what I tasted? And this obsession about getting on to the next thing, rather than being next, rather than being in the moment. I mean, the Buddhists. I'm listening to two fascinating books on mindfulness and Buddhism, and both have taught me an awful lot. I'm just going to look up which ones they were, because they were, the Joy of Living and Joy on Demand. And the Joy on Demand was a guy who was did sort of mindfulness in Google. He was a tech, and the other one was really more about a guy who was a Buddhist monk. And it's this, he said, the Buddha said, the purpose of life, everybody's seeking to be happy and avoid pain. Happiness and pain, those two things give us purpose. And also the other thing I was just thinking about, the Stoics with old Marcus Aurelius, and he was, I think, he had some lovely views. The fruit of this life, Marcus Aurelius said, is good character and acts for the common good. This idea of, are we, why are we here? Or, where are we on the planet? You could, at the fundamental evolutionary level, someone said it's just to pass along our genes. That's why we strive for success. Lust for sex keeps the species going. But it's got to be much more than that. It's got to be some unselfish things and why we do what we do. And I think this whole thing about goal obsession, you can get so carried away, and I know I have. And so I think it's a really great question that guy in New York asked. The problems of goal obsession is that we don't enjoy the moment we're in now, and we can't cope with changes. Churchill was the one who has said, you've changed your opinion. And he said, the honourable gentleman may say I've changed my mind, but when the facts change, I change my opinion. What do you do? What do you do? And because it's the point that sometimes that goal we're going for in a business, I was 20 years in the military, but I was going to have a full career to 55, hoping I was going to become a general. Well, it became pretty clear at about 20 years, if not a bit earlier, that I wouldn't be a general. And it wasn't really my kind of career. So that obsession about that career, which I gave 20 years of my life to, which is very much about meaning and purpose, I'll talk about that another time, then meant I'll do my MBA and go and do something else. And here I am. And this is my new meaning. Inspiring leadership is my life purpose. So, it's an interesting one. Going on to that, let's make it personal.
Great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, goal obsession. Thank you. Graham, for you and I, how can you build a mission-focused business, one with a clear mission, vision, and focus on executing a strategy that you've designed? Any thoughts on that one? Because people get fluffy and they talk about purpose, but a business, you got to nail it, and you got to deliver.
Mission-focused business. This is a great question as well. There's a lot of time spent, a lot of hours, a lot of energy spent in business thinking about purpose and missions. And I think we have to do it in the right way. That, it's kind of like you talk about like the Marcus Aurelius quote, like just the act of common good, if you like, just doing good. And in many ways that can be a purpose. You don't have to have this, game-changing, universe-denting purpose to be worthy. That's the key here. And it's kind of, there is a real space for a company that just does good. And I go back to, I mentioned it in episode 1, I think, Jonathan, about Toyota. And, it's just focus on being better every single day and serving your community. That's their goal. It's not like we're going to change the world, we're going to put a man on Mars. None of that. It's just, it's a very, in some ways, there's a bit of a Japanese Zen approach to it, which is, it's just that focus and dedication to the everyday and the mindfulness of doing that. It's like, the sushi chef, what they call in Japanese, the shokunin, which is like the Japanese craftsman, whether it's sushi or, carving a sword or, that love and that dedication to the love of the craft is a purpose, is a mission in itself. And we as business leaders can do that. We don't have to say, yeah, I want to cure cancer, or I want to, solve world hunger. That's fine. These are okay. But you can do so many things just by being good and being better every single day. And, showing a love and mindfulness for what you do and the people around you as well. To me, that's a really honorable mission. And in many ways, that leads to all these good things.
But aren't you, I mean, I get the sense you're doing that in your podcast agency, in the podcast work you do, the lives that you touch, the people you connect with, the storytelling you do. Are you not? I mean, making it personal for you, aren't you mission focused?
Yeah, I don't have an idea of like a big mission. To me, it's like the small mission. It's the small purpose. Every day, wake up and try and be better. Try and I really feel, like every day we have a choice, Jonathan. And it's like, I feel that every day we get to choose between love and fear. Right. And it's that choice, that conscious choice, and purpose means to do stuff with intent. Do the way you interact with somebody, the way you talk to a client, the way you, work with your employees, everything that you do you choose the path of love and fear? And I don't mean love like, free hugs. We're not talking about that type of love. We're talking about that sort of, real care, compassion for people and what you do, like not doing everything by the contract. It's not all going to be decided by the legal agreement. It's that relationship with people, the love for other people. And I think that's the choice that you can make. And I feel that is a really powerful mission, but it means putting yourself out there and maybe being a bit vulnerable as well. And you don't have all the answers. You don't, why are you doing this? Well, maybe you don't have to have a why answer. It's like, a quote. I just found this quote I was thinking about it, and then I checked it out whilst I was going up Mount Fuji. A Richard Feynman quote. Feynman is a famous physicist and very influential in the 20th century. And he was saying that, I don't have to know an answer. I don't feel frightened by not knowing things, by being lost in a mysterious universe without any purpose, which is the way it really is as far as I can tell. He says, nobody ever figures out what life is all about, and it doesn't matter. Explore the world. Nearly everything is really interesting if you go into it deeply enough. I think that's the mission. Just commit to that. And you don't have to have it all worked out, but it will work out.
I like Richard Feynman and his work, and that is profound. And it's just made me think that, if I was taking that question, how can I build a mission focused business, one with a clear mission, vision, and focus on executing? There's been times in my life, before I went into the army aged 18, I didn't really know what my life purpose and mission was. I was just trying to get my O levels done and my A levels and get to maybe go to university, but in the end, I didn't go until much later on. So maybe if that was a goal, I failed to achieve that one, and something else happened. So one door closed and another one opened. But then the army gave me 20 years of a very clear mission, vision, purpose. This is why we do what we do. We're defending the country, civil, military aid to the civil power, whatever it might be, peacekeeping in Bosnia, peacekeeping in Northern Ireland. That was very clear. And then I left and went into the consulting world, PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM, Penner as a managing director, and now my own business. And actually have found on reflecting that inspiring leadership in you, in others, and everybody listening, how can I inspire you to be a better leader so that those who follow you around you, or you're a good follower, lead better? So the end result is people feel a sense of meaning, purpose, accomplishment, enjoy their lives more, that sense of happiness and avoiding pain that the Buddha talked about. So I think it takes work, but a lot of the time people don't know what it is, or they have some ethereal idea. This is our purpose and this is our mission. They just stick it on the wall, but they don't live it. And they certainly don't know how to turn it out into this means these projects with these work streams delivering this over time when they're a big business. But smaller businesses, if I could inspire a few CEOs who make a difference in their organizations, my work is done. And I feel I've made my contribution to society before I die in the next few years, however many that is. So there's a lot there, isn't there? I'll move on to the next question, which is sort of linked to that. Graham, how do you strive to find meaning and purpose in your private life and at work, giving you a more fulfilling, satisfied life? What's the mix?
My private life, finding purpose, to me, it's like an extension of what I do in work and vice versa. That, like we sort of set out individually, don't we, on these missions? Like, I love your story about, like the army, 20 years, you can see that sort of tenure and that growth. And then, you have this pivot at some point. We all kind of go through these journeys in life, and it doesn't go according to the initial plan, right? Nobody's, but you pivot and you're flexible and resilient, and that's something we're going to talk about, isn't it? So the mission really is, like finding purpose and mission for me is like just doing good and being right here, right now, trying to do good, what I think is good, and be a good person. And I think that's it. It's like, you as an individual, can you be a good person? Do you act out of moral integrity? And that the mission evolves out of that, right? You talk about the army defending the country or going to Bosnia. That's because they have a moral obligation or belief in protecting people, right? That's the idea, isn't it? That's their moral compass, is that we believe in these certain human values which are not, you can't compromise, right? They're not negotiable. So we will protect people for that. And I think individually, whether you're a father or whether you are a husband or whatever role you play in your life, you have this sense of moral obligation. And I think that then it's just down to you on a daily basis to say, how can I be a good person? What is being a good person? And I know you've quoted a few Buddhist texts. I found one myself. Alan Watts, who I do really admire in terms of his writing. He's sort of more Zen when it comes to Buddhism, but he wrote something about purpose, which I think really encourages me about my daily basis. And he said, the meaning of life is just to be alive. It's so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet, and here's your dash, everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. And I love that. It's like, okay, it's okay not to achieve something beyond yourself, because you can achieve so many things just by trying to be a good version of yourself. To me, that's an honorable mission and something we can all aspire to.
Yeah. That's very pertinent for me. And when I look back over my 60 years so far, I'm much prouder of the life I'm living now, which has that greater alignment between how I am in the work I do and how I am at home with Lee and my 4 children, grandchildren, that I am much more aligned now. And I can look myself in the mirror and go, I actually like what I see. Whereas there was probably times when I was younger, when I was so obsessed about doing my career and climbing the greasy pole of promotion to major and this kind of stuff, that I wasn't quite as good at home as I should have been if I was following the same kind of rules at work. And I look back, I had a failed marriage. I didn't make that one work. I wish I had, but it wasn't to be. But that was some of my behavior led to that. And so you do have to look yourself at as they call that poem about the man in the mirror. And do you like what you see? And if you're living your life on purpose rather than off purpose, then you are aligned. And your private life and your work life, it's like, I call it work-life integration. It's not work-life balance, never balance.
Yes,
it's always out
absolutely.
of balance. Particularly someone like you and I who are sort of workaholics, or not completely.
Forget it.
But it's not going to be balanced, but can you make sure that you bring the same person with you each? And when I meet clients who I'm coaching, CEOs who say, well, at work I'm like this, but at home I'm completely, I go like, that's a problem.
That's wrong, yeah.
Because it's at some stage it's going to blow up. You can't live these 2 lives, like having sort of 2 families and not telling each other about them. And
people have done that. Yeah.
I won't mention any politicians like that, but it's like that kind of thing. They will get found out in the end. And it was William McRaven. I was listening to him, and he was great stories that he tells, Admiral William McCraven, make your bed. And he said, when a young lad, he lied to his dad, and his dad didn't tackle him on it, but he just gave him the evidence and put it beside the bed and just said nothing. He was 8, 11 at the time. And he learned the lesson then about don't lie because you get found out. I think I've done some things I'm ashamed about over time. And now I'm much more comfortable with how I am. And if anybody woke me up in the middle of the night and asked me a question, I could answer it. And it is the truth. And I think that is really important about living a life now.
Living your truth, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a lie, it's the truth.
We're all doing that to some degree, aren't we? And we're encouraged to do it by society, like, to be that version of yourself, which you're not, to go up the greasy pole, all those kind of things. Advertising encourages us to be like this, to be, live out stories which aren't our own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the real interesting part of this is that we all do it, and yet we don't realize how much energy we expend doing it, having these two versions of ourselves. And a friend of mine said to me a few years ago, is when I was recording YouTube videos and I thought, oh, shall I do it like this? And he said to me, look, don't make two versions of yourself. And it was just so simple what he said to me. And yet, bing, the light went on. I thought, oh my God, that's like really profound. And I thought, because if I was just myself, I don't have to use all this energy to create this second version of me. One version is enough, right? And one version is a lot of energy and a lot of trouble. So having two, yeah. And I think that's something that we can work on. That comes to purpose as well, though, right? Surely it's just being true to that one version of yourself.
And I've experienced that with you on the podcast. So when we chat as friends on a call and we're not being recorded, and then we come into the recording, I'd like to think we're actually just the same.
Yeah.
We're talking, but yet, as I get certified as a CEO's world-class speaking coach, which is my next thing, I've got a group of people already who want to be trained by me as a speaker, as to be CEOs who can do better speaking. I do find when I'm doing my own version of a keynote speech, sometimes I catch myself putting on this kind of voice, and I go, "What's that about? What voice is that?
It's your game voice."
Yeah, it's like, here he is, something different. Hello, everybody.
Well, maybe that's just a bit of, it's a bit of showboating. It's a bit of fun. I don't think that's, it was like if you did karaoke, you would pretend to be some rock star, right? But yeah, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's sort of the harmless version of it, right? But if you went on there and told stories that weren't true or try to be something you weren't, that would be different.
No, well, I think you're correct. And it is about all this about meaning and purpose. Is this about finding your element? And this is where I think I've mentioned the book by St. Ken Robinson, who you love as well. And if anybody hasn't watched him, he does the top TED speeches. Right, He's got more than anybody else. Sadly, he died a couple of years ago, but he's always been one of my heroes. And he's sort of come on, and I think he had a sort of club foot or a reinforced foot with a platform shoe, and he'd take the mickey out of himself, and it just have you in stitches. It just laughter all the way through. But he was telling in his book, Finding Your Element, which is a good listen. He was brought in and watching a young girl. The parents were worried. They brought him to this, I think, psychiatrist because they had special needs, and the girl was a problem. And the psychiatrist put on the radio and left the young girl in the room. So we'll be back in a few minutes. And they went outside and they watched round the corner. And as they'd gone out of the room, the music, she got up and she started to dance to the music. and the psychologist said, your daughter's not a problem. She hasn't got any special needs. She's a dancer. She just wants to dance. Take her to dance school. She then became the one who did all the choreography with Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cats and all the rest. And she was world-class dancer. But that was her element. And I think we've got to find our element. I think, I know I'm in my element here with you and, coaching CEOs and executive teams. And that's when I come alive. And I think meaning and purpose is when we do come alive. And there's many things I'm awful at. And I struggle hard at it. It's not really me. That vicious circle of not good at it, don't do it well, down I go. And other things which I'm really so easy. I love it, I enjoy it, so I do, and I keep learning. Like, the work we're doing here, you're constantly teaching me things. I'm reading up stuff. We both prepare for this and learn more in the process. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, all of the above, Jonathan.
Yeah,
That's like, yeah, you've summed it up. No, the constant learning, just being real as well. That point about the things, recognizing what you don't like and what you don't want to do. And I think a key part of the purpose as well is just like being very conscious. I think being aware and conscious is really underrated in terms of, like living a fulfilling life. Being aware of the things you say, being aware of the influences on you. Who is the stories that are infiltrating your head? Where are they coming from? Where are you getting those from? Who's shaping your life and shaping your narrative? These are really important. Being aware of that, being awake to it, and the stuff that you don't like and the stuff you do like. And then that's the choice that you make between, doing more of one and less of the other. It's that simple. Making that choice. Years ago, when I started my sort of odyssey of traveling the world after selling a business, and trying to find my purpose, if you like, I thought my purpose would come from living on tropical islands and taking all these amazing Instagram sunsets, which I did, by the way, but that didn't give me any sense of fulfillment. And things that make me happy are things like riding a bike. Who would have believed it? Or talking to somebody like a kindred spirit in a different country like this, right? So then the question is like, if life purpose is to find not necessarily that, but design a life that enables you to do more of that. And that's it. Maybe purpose is a verb as opposed to a state that you find or achieve. It's like something you have to keep doing, like that sort of common good Marcus Aurelius thing. It's like that common action, common decency on a daily basis. That's purpose, I believe.
Yeah, well, for me, you have a clear meaning and purpose. As a storyteller, you are fabulous as a storyteller, and getting other people to tell their stories and then making meaning out of things, because that's primeval. That goes back to generations of people out on the Serengeti wandering around with a stick and a bladder on a shoulder full of water, not their own bladder.
Still do that.
And just passing on stories, and it is so appealing to us. We do love the stories, but the military, they used to have a saying, swing the lantern and pull up a sandbag, and let me tell you a story.
I love that.
And I think back to that book that I was enjoying, The Habit of Excellence. Was they talk about in the military, and it resonates very well, that we talked about pride, people, and purpose, and it was a profession of arms with a sense of purpose, but with unlimited liability. Not many people are asked to give their life for their job, and so it made leaders have an acute sense of consequence of what they did every day and every action they take, because they had this deep sense of obligation that they're responsible for the safe return of every soldier to his or her families and friends. And it was like, there's this timeless ability of leaders to think clearly, act ethically, and lead confidentially. It's what we call values-based leadership. And I don't know what resonates for you there, but I just found that during my time in the military, and it's a family you never leave. So you will always, you can take the man out of the military, but you can't take the military out of the man, because you've served and you've got a connection. So I've made friends with people in the American military and things like that. When I was in Peru, two servicemen, a Green Beret and a tank sergeant, both amazing guys with their own experiences. And so that had a clear sense of purpose and meaning. You knew exactly what you were doing. And if you didn't have a sense of purpose to every action that you did, or you asked people to do, they were putting their life on the line. Had you not busted your ass to find out why they've got to do that, just like because I say so isn't good enough. And so I think we owe this to everybody we're with and to ourselves. Why am I doing this? And what should I stop doing? What do you think?
Yeah, that part about the unlimited liability, that really hits you. You realize, maybe in days gone by in different eras, that wasn't such an issue because they were literally cannon fodder.
Mm.
You know, we're talking like pre-World War II military. I mean, you know, throwing them over the trenches, right?
Mm.
These days it's different. You know, these people have lives, they have families, and, you know, they have a voice as well. That's crazy, isn't it? That people would do that and risk their lives nowhere else.
Yeah, and that is why, as an instructor at the Military Academy at Sandhurst, which I still think it is one of the best leadership development centers in the world. And I know, you know, West Point would be proud of what it does as well in America, but you have to get it right, because you're leading people potentially to their death, or getting them to do unlimited liability things for the sake of the good of the country and others. And they would die for colleagues. I mean, I was listening to stories of people in, you know, the Korean War and stuff like that. The Gloucesters all surrounded by about 1 million Chinese. And they would still rush and take a position, even though they'd been shot. And they would get themselves up again and have a go again. Why do that kind of thing? Now, clearly people go, I can't relate to that because that's just the military. But could you find some way in the work you do, if you're listening, that you are prepared to encourage people to willingly give discretionary life energy? They choose to give it to you because you're doing the right thing for the organization or for the customer or for other people or for society. You might be in, you know, the services, the fire, the police, the ambulance, doctors, nurses, whatever it might be, but you're doing things for the good of others rather than short-term self-interest just so you can make a lot more money and have a Ferrari.
Yeah. I would say that, you know, the challenge, and we sort of mentioned this when we talked about morals as well, Jonathan, sort of bridges into purpose, is that we do individually and collectively have a purpose. Like any group that you're in, there is a sense of fealty and loyalty to each other, that band of brothers. That's natural in groups where there's that sort of shared, you know, shared sense of belonging, right? Whether that's in a military group or wherever it may be, even in like a, you know, a group of graduates who are good friends or people who start businesses together, right? There's always, I mean, there are different kind of levels. It's not like they're going to die, but there's a sense of connection, right? The problem is I find that we lose, and this is what you talk about off purpose, we lose our way. You know, we get put off purpose, you know, we forget why we do this. And the reason why I guess the military is so good at bringing it back to the compass is because they're constantly being reminded and checked. You know, if you're in a combat situation, you know, if you're off target or off base or off mission, slightly things go wrong, right? People can die in that situation. Like in a business, you might not have those kind of consequences, and it may take weeks or months before you feel it, especially the big businesses and organizations, and God forbid, talking about government agencies, for example. You know, it may take years before they realize the rot is there. But in military, it's there straight away. Somebody's down because we were, you know, off base, off target, off mission, whatever it may be. And it's interesting that I did a podcast last week with a chap from the RAF, ex-pilot, and we were talking about off course, you know, being off course. And he said, because he was a pilot, that when he was a pilot, every 5 minutes they did their field checks, FEEL. And the military loves their acronyms, doesn't it? They have all their kind of terminology and the checks and stuff like that. You know, it's like fuel, electric, engine, line, I think, or landing gear, whatever, line of sight. You know, every 5 minutes he would check. Every 5 minutes check. And like, you know, they would have the warning lights telling you, but they would get it drilled into them, like do this, do this, do this, do this. And you can see that in the military. So when you're in that kind of fight or flight situation, you're not, oh, what do I do? What do I do? It's like almost a natural response, isn't it? You know how to all kind of spread out, take cover or whatever it may be. It's all drilled into you. And bringing this back into the world of business, I think therefore purpose is so important. If you believe in purpose and that you want to have a purposeful organization, to have those habits that keep bringing you back and checking and checking and checking. You know, the purpose is found not in the big statements, but in the everyday, the small activities and the small actions.
So right, and that resonated very strongly with me, your pilot and his experience. obviously with my father being a pilot, and he was killed with faulty equipment. The blade came off the turbine, sliced through his aircraft. He got the other guy out, but he died because of the misfiring of his ejector seat. Bad manufacturing, killed him. But my daughters, for my 60th, Harriet and Bryony, very kindly paid for me to go and have an hour's flying, because they said, look, our grandfather, your dad, was a pilot. And so have you not ever wanted to fly yourself? And I've been up in airplanes, and obviously I've jumped out of them normally before they land, which is, the way it is, or a helicopter or whatever it might be. But it was a really special moment to be up over the Lincolnshire countryside along the coast. And for about an hour, I had about 40 minutes where I was at the controls flying, and I could think of my father. But the pilot who took me up was ex-Cathay Pacific, ex-RAF fighter jet pilot. Lovely guy, we got on so well. But as you say, he got out his instructions, and even though he's 60 and he's been doing it all his life, he'd go, I'm just going to go through this, check this, check. And he'd go through line by line, so nothing was missed. And when we came down and we were turning off, check, all the way down. And I think it's a good reminder to us, whether you're at the NHS or doing systems like that, where in the operating theatre with Adam Brooke, who you and I know, he and the guys, the nurses, are checking through as everything done. So that there isn't some scalpel left in the poor patient or whatever it is. Where's the scalpel? Oh my God, we've checked everything. I joke, but sometimes in the past
it happens.
That has happened. And I think it's really important for us in having a meaningful life that we make sure we are checking we're on course, as the guy was saying, we're not off course, and we are living our life on purpose, because it's very easy just to drift a little bit off, and by the end of it you're way off, you're miles off course. Let's come on to the next phase, our role models that you got me to think about last at the very first session, and how they created meaning and purpose, or how they found meaning in the work they did in their life, and indeed they give meaning and purpose to us after their death. So do you want to talk about your crew and what?
My crew. Who do we have on the list?
So you had Robert Kennedy, you had Martin Luther King, you had Greta Thunberg, you had Mr. Honda, you had Rosa Parks, Bill Gates, Tim Cook, and Steve Jobs.
All right. Okay.
Any of those that come to mind?
All of them. Yeah. So I would like, Robert Kennedy, again, the only reason I'd like to talk about him is because everybody knows his brother. And he was the unknown Kennedy, so even though he stood for president, was assassinated, unfortunately, like his brother. I really feel it's an interesting story. He's a very flawed man, certainly not, perfect, had his faults. But in terms of purpose, he had a moral compass. He started out, the son of a very large Irish white family, middle class. I think his dad was a judge. His mum was some sort of like high society wheeler dealer, very much a driving force in the Kennedy family, right? And obviously they became politicians, and his brother became president, and he was kind of like the legal advisor and the campaign advisor and all of this, right? And it's interesting because, like, at the time, the civil rights movement was kind of kicking off in the US, and you had people like Martin Luther King emerging and so on. And at the beginning, the Kennedys are very much not interested in entertaining this new force. And, it was still very much a white, the Democrats were very much a white party at the time. They didn't really care for that sort of, that electorate, right? But over time, after the assassination of his brother, he changed. That's the change, that pivot point that you talked about. You have that journey, and then you realize actually, the moral compass and what's actually happening with you change. Like your moral compass takes you on a different direction to this narrative that you've been living, this purpose, if you like. The moral compass leads you. And he became very much a advocate for civil rights. Not just for blacks, but also for Hispanics in America. And, if you look at him in his later part of his career, he very much is very liberal, very progressive, and well ahead of his time. And it was just such a horrible shame that he was assassinated, right? and maybe that's why he was assassinated. But I think that's just a good example. I think anybody that has opportunity and assets and influence and power and uses that for common good rather than their own personal gain, I think is somebody who is a good leader and leads on purpose. And there are not many people who do that, but he would be one. And I'm sure you
and just stay with that
give
one
lots
for
of
a moment.
examples. Why
No,
not?
stay with that, Graham, because without mentioning any politicians, we're finding these days.
I know where you're going, Jonathan.
But we're finding these days that we desperately need good politicians who have that sense of bringing meaning and purpose for the long-term good of the country, whether it be growing country to make it better, rather than their short-term personal gain. Or after they, like Tony Blair, after he's left, he's doing some good things, but he's also making millions from charging massively high fees. However, he does have a foundation, to be fair to him, and I think he is doing a lot of good to try and make up for the Iraq War and all that stuff that he did with Bush. So what can we do to get leaders to be back to doing things for the common good with a calling and a cause rather than just self-serving while they're there and what they can get after they've been in because they become famous? I don't know. What's your thoughts?
How can those leaders understand the common good if they've never lived it? I mean, you're dealing with people. I know who you're talking about. There are a group of politicians who come from an elite set of society. They never understood. Like you see these interviews with like Rishi Sunak, right? He said, "Oh, I don't know anybody that's working class." What kind of a response is that? That's the problem, isn't it? Don't you feel that you can, unless that person's actually walked in their shoes, how can you get them ever to think about what they're feeling?
And that was what was so very good with, let me take one from my list, General Lord Dannett, Richard Dannett, who I've interviewed, episode 200. While again, a human with his own failings, he had many of the real qualities, definitely, of an inspiring leader. Probably that he's influenced me more than anybody else as sort of father figure in the absence of my own father, because of his high moral integrity. He's had a strong Christian, still has a strong Christian faith, trying to leave a legacy, things better than he found it. So in the army's case, he talked about the army's covenant with society, that we have this unlimited liability, we will potentially die for you, but when any of the soldiers are injured or killed or their families are bereaved, please, the country, look after them, find a way of caring for them, and not just in financial ways, but just make sure they're looked after. And I think you do find people like that who have doing something for the good service, serve to lead, good of the country. And, when he dabbled with politicians and tried to get involved with it, he got his fingers burnt because they couldn't keep their integrity. It's written about, so it's not something I'm speaking out of turn. But I think if only we could get back to people like him, who he remembered still the corporal who he served with on the streets of Northern Ireland, who was injured, and he looked after him and he made sure he was okay. And he kept that relationship with him all the way through. And he would go to the toughest parts of Middlesbrough where we were recruited from, and knew where they lived and what they did and what their lives were like. And they both sat in a trench together in the pissing rain, sharing stories. And so he could relate to people from any background. And that's the mark of a very special man or woman as a leader.
He's been there, right?
Yeah.
If you've been in the situation like with your men, if the men know that, if it's the front line, I know we're not fighting trenches anymore, but if you're in the front line, he would go over the top as well.
Yeah.
They would go up.
His book's called Leading from the Front. And it's exactly what he did. And just like Florence Nightingale, particularly a female leader, she was brought up in privilege and many times got the calling, as it were, to go and help and do nursing. But the family stopped her. We're not going to have, nurses are prostitutes. That's what they end up doing to make enough money and this kind of stuff. They were just, the family was so blinkered about what was possible. And that wasn't the thing in Victorian era when you were wealthy, upper class, you did. But in the end, she broke away. She was a rebel. And she went in, and she was with these soldiers, holding their hands as they're in the last stages of dying in the Crimea, telling her their story, crying while she was with them. She knew what they went through. She lived in the squalor. So I do think you have to be able to relate to other people in order to lead them. You need to know their story. You need to, as you said, walk a mile in their shoes.
Do what's right. That's the moral integrity, right?
Yeah.
That's. I think the purpose is that after my viewpoint. I know we're slightly different. I think at the end of the day, the effect is the same, but the purpose is the product, the byproduct of that moral integrity of somebody who can sit with the men and comfort them, right? Because she knows that's the right thing to do. And she knows she will have to face criticism to do that. That's moral integrity. And that's like the small picture rather than, oh, I'm going to go out and change the world. She never decided to do that. That was never the plan, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we have a similar view. I just look at it from another perspective, which is that without the foundation of what we talked about first, which is MQ, moral quotient, that true north, that values and beliefs, what you will and won't do, and the service orientation of legacy, which we're going to do at the very end in episode 9, LQ, then PQ, that sense of meaning and purpose, becomes quite self-serving because you've got no moral compass and you're not really interested in leaving a legacy. You just want to make as much as you can for now. You'll say the right things. But people smell it, don't they? They know if you really genuinely care about them or if you're bullshitting them. And this is where many of the politicians are struggling so much.
They get away with it. That's the thing. They can get away with it, Jonathan. That's why they're attracted to politics.
What else?
We're going to make some enemies here.
I think we may. I definitely won't go for local councillor. What about Martin Luther King or Honda or
Martin Luther King? Definitely, yeah, definitely. I mean, again, somebody like anybody that can stand up. Leadership fundamentally is about choosing the path of most resistance. Anybody that can do that, I think, is somebody who leads with moral integrity, and that is the purpose, right? Not necessarily setting out to, change the world, but just by acting, being a good person. I definitely think again, I'm sure if you dig into his story, there's lots of faults, but
yeah.
What about yourself, Jonathan? Where do you fall? You've got your list. Who would you say would be living a life or lived a life on purpose?
Well, it is a politician, actually. It's Barack Obama. Not everybody's cup of tea. Clearly, if you're as polarized as society, isn't it? That we've got populism, polarization, and post-truth, which is the problem. But I found there was someone there who really did believe in what he was doing. Okay, he wasn't perfect in any sense, but he certainly was a statesman, and he did have integrity, and he did have a sense of care for the people he was leading and what he wanted to do. Which sort of takes me on to the next one, which is inspiring organizations, our next phase. And I've clearly talked about the British Army, because I think that is an organization with a clear sense of mission and purpose, and it wants to do good. Some armies, of course, have got corrupted, and they've got where the generals take over the running of a country, or they become stooges to politicians, and they get sofas stuffed full of notes and that kind of stuff, and take over troubled and failing countries. But generally, the British Army is one. I came across a mission-focused company, Remitly Global, over in Seattle, who Lee and I love working with them, because they're trying to help immigrants send money back to their loved ones. And it's about the love and the connection with what they're doing and making it as easy and as simple for them to do that. And then something like a British charity I know, the NSPCC, the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, where Sir Peter Wanless, I was lucky enough to coach Peter and his board, and he's been CEO for a while now, and he really cares about what they do. And they've got a lady who's 106. She's been fundraising for the NSPCC for many years, and she's 106.
Wow. That's phenomenal.
Just phenomenal. It gets that kind of loyalty and that kind of cause to prevent this cruelty, this awful stuff that people will do. Now, many people will get more excited about the RSPCA, the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, than they do about children. And sometimes we spend more on our pets than we do some people spend on their children. But I think whatever your passion is, I think when you've got a charity that's really doing good work and is mission focused, it really matters. With the caveat that sometimes I've come across one or two pretty unpleasant people who claim to be leaders, but are actually quite toxic. But they go, but I'm a good person because I'm working for a charity. So
Yeah.
it's like saying
Lance Armstrong. We mentioned him last time.
Yeah. So what about you? What inspiring
Jimmy Savile.
Oh,
Dude, did I say it?
yeah, you did.
That's all you need to know. Like,
Yes.
okay.
And they do prey on the vulnerable in every sense.
Yeah.
You know, they find a charity, they prey on that, or they get a veneer that I'm doing good stuff because I'm working for this, helping everybody else. What about your organizations? What about the good ones?
Yeah, I would. I think that obviously there's some amazing work happening in the organizations that you mentioned. I would probably think that there's a whole bunch of listeners who aren't fortunate enough to work for those organizations and maybe just work for very normal organizations that don't have obvious mission statements. And maybe, you know, their mission is to make money. So they're trying to find some meaning in all of that. And that's probably the challenge. It's probably 95% of it, isn't it? You know, I'm the CEO of XYZ widget company. What do I do? Right. I would sort of caution against the idea of, you know, living by a mission statement alone. I think that's, you know, I've got one here, for example, where I'll read to you. It says, "We work with customers and prospects openly, honestly, and sincerely. We are committed to operating safely and conducting business worldwide in compliance with all health safety laws and improve the lives of the people in the regions in which we operate." You know, that's very vanilla. That's kind of what you expect of a mission statement. That was on the placard in the headquarters of Enron.
Oh boy.
And I think that just goes to show what mission statements are and what they can do. You know, that has no impact at all on the, you know, the DNA and the running of the organization. So I think it has to come down to the day-to-day stuff. Like, you know, you can have great mission statements, but toxic people and toxic DNA. And that's why it's so important that daily, I mean, the Japanese have a word, which is kaizen, which basically means constant improvement. And if you look at the work of Toyota, for example, I know they're a boring manufacturing company, but I really believe that they live with purpose, and their purpose is to improve the lives, to do better every day and to service the community in which they operate. And that community doesn't just mean their employees, but also all the suppliers around them. You know, they are the one company that doesn't lay people off like the other manufacturers. You know, they want to keep people on. They see it as a partnership long term. I think that's just being good. Like as an automotive manufacturer can be, that is a good mission to do that very well. And I'm impressed by how they do it. You know, it's to do it with that focus and passion for detail and love, and, you know, constant, you know, respect and service for the craft, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's not an obvious one. They're not like going to Mars, guys. But to me, it's like, who's doing the most good here at the end of the day? They're employing hundreds of thousands of people and putting food on the table, right?
Yes, it doesn't have to be dramatic and, you know, world beating. Well, those are all great, but just it's the way that they treat their people and the way they do live their values that matters. So take the Panama Papers, which I mentioned last week, and the moral question with Mossack Fonseca, this law firm that was morally and financially corrupt to the core. You know, all the mafia and people like Putin and others were using them to have shell companies to hide stuff. And they were saying great things about their governments, like Enron did. But they were paying some of their staff who worked there and signed off as managers of these various shell companies a pittance. But yet they were multimillionaires themselves, the two, Mossack and Fonseca. So if you find yourself in an organization that really is, I don't know, lost its way, don't stay. It's like working for a psychopath. you won't change them. They're just rotten to the core. Get out. Get away.
And
get
you've
out,
done that.
Leave them.
Like go back to listen episode 2 with us,
Yeah.
Jonathan's experience of working with a psycho.
Yeah. You just have to get away from it, because they have no meaning and purpose that fits with how they're behaving. Their rhetoric and their reality are misaligned, and then you know it. And people go, oh, I'm surprised eventually it fell apart. Well, when you look back at these things, you could have seen them happening. I mean, I was just reading just now about the fact that Trump did a deal with the Taliban in Qatar in 2020. And after that, the Afghan government were just puppets. They were dead in the water. And it took 18 months for it eventually to all collapse. But he didn't get around to telling the British that he'd done this particular type of deal and what it meant. And so there was this sudden panic, and all these Afghans left behind, and all the interpreters. It just was a shock, a scandal, a just awful way of doing a dirty deed and not telling people what you've done. So on from inspiring organizations and uninspiring organizations to inspiring books. We're almost at the end, Graham. What books have you found are really good on meaning and purpose that you'd recommend?
Yeah, this is a good question. I'm going to pick the ones that aren't set out to talk about meaning and purpose. I'm aware of the books that you're going to share. There's some you've kind of got in there before me, some of the ones that I would have shared. But I would pick some ones that aren't obvious. So George Orwell, Homage or Homage to Catalonia, which I really enjoyed reading. Everybody knows George Orwell for the obvious 1984 Animal Farm, but to me, his best writings with the other stuff. Homage to Catalonia is, I just think it's a wonderful book. It's just about a soldier's life. So he signs up to fight the fascists in the Spanish Civil War, pre-World War II, fight Franco. So he's on the side of the socialists, if you like, because they were on the anarchists, they were like a coalition, right? Really interesting. I got a quote from it. Again, it's really links into what we've been talking about today. And he said that if you asked me why I had joined the militia, I should have answered to fight against fascism. That's the purpose, right? And if you asked me what I was fighting for, I should have answered common decency. And I feel that that's kind of like your soldier's lot, isn't it? Is that, you've mentioned, for example, like with the Taliban example, that these people have, I'm not talking about the Taliban, I'm talking about like the American forces, right? They have mission statements, right? But the issue is like when you have people that don't act out of common decency. And yet here's George Orwell, who went off to fight fascism, but what he found was just this shared common decency, this belief in values, that moral compass that we act out on a daily basis. And in the trenches, literally, in these these Spanish trenches where they would spend months just not doing anything, just rotting away, starving, freezing, trench foot, being shelled, all these kind of things, being sniped. And like with people who are literally 100 meters away from them, it's just finding decency in that. And I think that is just a real interesting insight into purpose, that actually there are these human values that we possess. They're very sort of Zen-like about it. There's no sort of this big mission. There's these human values we possess that bind us all. And the challenge is not letting stuff get in the way of that, because when you can bring it back to that and make that core to what you do, then you can live a very purposeful and good life, I believe, and fulfilling life as well. So that's kind of unexpected book choice, but I want to put that one out there, George Orwell, Homage to Catalonia. And if anybody's read it in the listeners, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. Not one of those ones that they forced on you at A level, but actually read it because you enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Very powerful. I think of the ones I've got, I think Man's Search for Meaning is obviously one that you and I know, by Viktor Frankl, who was being experimented on by the Nazis in a concentration camp. And this thing about when you have a clear idea of what you can control, your thoughts and your actions, but you can't control the external things that are happening and being done to you, I think it's very powerful. And then Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life by Dr. Wayne Dyer, I found very interesting about when you are trying to work out what you want to do in your life and your sense of meaning and purpose, then a lot of the time our own thoughts get in the way of it. And how do we get out of our own way with stuff that stops us achieving things that we want to achieve, or oh, I can't do that. So yeah, I think those were two books. Any final thoughts, Graham, before we talk about a teaser for next month and appreciate?
Yeah, this has been a good episode. I think it's challenging. It's challenging me to think about purpose as well, and really think it through. You know, like at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to find, it's the man's search for meaning, isn't it? That's really what it is. Like we started off today talking about Mount Fuji and ended up talking briefly about Viktor Frankl, right? It's that search for meaning, trying to find meaning. Like, why do you climb a mountain? There's no point in it, really, is there? There's no, you know, it's not going to help you, like you say, procreate and sustain your genes into the next generation. It's not going to help if that's the meaning of life, right? But it's finding meaning in stuff which has no meaning. Like climbing a mountain has no meaning. We create the meaning about that, right? And that's the point. This is all, like, purpose really is about finding meaning in what we do. And, you know, the key here, I guess the lesson learned is that, you know, the meaning is really down to you to find it. And it's a story you can write about purpose. There isn't necessarily just, you know, purpose doesn't mean going to Mars. It means whatever you think is worth your time and a good use of your skills and energy in this life, right? And I think if we can write that purpose ourselves, that meaning ourselves, then that's a good sign that that's where you've got those two versions of you in unison. Yeah,
beautifully put. And I'd probably just build on that really with the Stoic idea that we're here for each other. We're bees at the same hive, that we're here to make things better for others, for the next generation, that makes our life meaningful and worth living. You taking your son up there, training him, passing on skills, the way you are with people, the way you chatted to the 80-year-old lady that you met who just coming down from summiting. Because when we do that, we find happiness and respect for ourselves. It gives our life a sense of meaning and purpose. So just to remember that it's all about your learning and action. What have I learned? What am I going to do differently? So next month, as a teaser for next month, we're very much looking forward to this. Graham and I love this whole area of HQ. It's the third of the components of inspiring leadership on the compass, which you'll see in my website, jonathanperks.com, if you want to look at the different elements of it, which is about mental and physical health and well-being. It's about brain health as well. So we're going to have some great conversations because we both put a lot of time and effort into health, well-being, fitness, and pushing ourselves hard for that. So
we've been to the edge, Jonathan.
We've been to the edge.
We've stared down the precipice. We looked over and saw the dark abyss. We came back a little bit older and grayer.
Yeah, we definitely have, and done crazy things. But let's talk about health and well-being. It is so important to us, our longevity and all that goes on. So if you have any questions, drop me a note, jonathanperks.com, to my website. Please have a browse around at the other podcasts that are on there. There's 230 of them, so fill your boots. And next, the final thing we'll do is end by appreciating one quality about each other. Do you want to go first, Graham? And then I'll wrap it up with an appreciation of you. Do you want to begin with one quality?
Thank you. Yes. You are very generous in not just your communication, your feelings and your emotion, like you're open and honest, and that's really sometimes disarming, you know, like to find somebody like that, and it's only a positive thing. But I want to share this quote, which is from John Krakauer from the book Into the Wild, and it says, "Happiness is only real when shared." It's actually lifted from Leo Tolstoy, I believe. But that's my appreciation of you, because you've created this sharing moment, which really, to me, it's like really a happy moment. This time that we have together. If people listen to this, that's great. That's a bonus. Honestly, you know, I think that's how you should go into everything. Not worry about the audience, right? Just be really present. And this like you in some way are teaching me that, like to be really present here, connect, and just kind of like drop the bullshit a little bit about myself. You know, it's okay. You're slightly older and wiser, so I'm seeing how it's done, how it turns out. So I really do appreciate that, you know, in a sincere way. And I think for me, it's kind of I'm learning that lesson, but not obviously so, if that makes sense. I'm kind of like, oh, actually, you know, in time to come, I'll see that was actually not a turning point, but it's definitely an inflection in, you know, all of this. So I really do appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. And wow. Really makes me reflect there. My appreciation of you is I just knew it was going to be such fun that we were going to have in just pulling up a sandbag, swinging a lantern, sharing some
I
stories
love that.
together.
I would steal that. So
yeah, and you can do it in a way that it's okay not to get it right, or not to remember something, or it'll come to you later on. But we just have such a lovely banter between us, and I do respect you for all that you've achieved, all that you've done, and how you show up. I just love the way you show up. So that's my appreciation of you. So without further ado, I look forward to next month and talking about health and well-being. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Inspiring Leadership Podcast.